I won't let you take him. The words tore out of Mia Morgan before she could stop them, ripped from somewhere deeper than thought, somewhere primal and unafraid. Her split lips bled into the words. Her left eye was swelling purple, the skin around it already darkening like a bruise spreading through water. Each breath sent fire through her ribs where Marcus Webb's fist had connected just seconds before. She stood in the narrow alley behind Sullivan's Diner on Chicago's south side, her body positioned like a shield between the three men and a 7-year-old boy named Emma. The concrete beneath her feet was slick with February slush, gray and filthy. Her hands shook, but she spread her arms wider, blocking the child from their reach. Marcus Webb stepped forward again. 28 years old, gold rings on every finger, smirking with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. His breath reeked of expensive whiskey and entitlement. His two enforcers flanked him, shoulders broad as refrigerators, hands hanging loose and ready. "You don't even know whose kid that is, sweetheart," Marcus said. His voice carried the kind of cruelty that comes from never experiencing consequences. His fist connected with her ribs again. The crack was audible even over the distant traffic, even over the February wind cutting through the alley like a blade wrapped in ice. She dropped to one knee, pain exploding through her chest, but her arms stayed wide. She did not move aside. Across the street, visible through the chain-link fence that bordered the diner's property, a black Mercedes sat idling with tinted windows so dark they looked like absence. Inside, Alejandro Caruso watched. 43 years old. Gray threading his dark hair at the temples. Eyes that had not softened since the day he buried his stillborn son 20 years ago, a child he never got to hold, a life that ended before it began. The wound never healed. It only calcified. His lieutenant Rocco sat in the driver's seat. 62 years old with a scar running from his left eye to his jawline, white and thin like a razor cut. He had worked for Alejandro Caruso for 37 years, since they were boys running the streets together. In 3 decades, Rocco had learned to read his boss's silence the way other men read books. "Boss," Rocco said quietly. "That woman just took a hit for Emma." Alejandro's knuckles whitened on the door handle. His jaw tightened. But he did not move. Not yet. What Mia Morgan did not know was that the child she was protecting in that frozen alley belonged to Chicago's most feared mafia boss. What she did not know was that the man beating her was that same boss's own nephew, a spoiled heir named Marcus Webb who had been hunting her for months after she refused his advances at the grocery store where she worked restocking shelves on her feet until they bled into her shoes. What she did not know was that Marcus had seen the perfect leverage in this 7-year-old boy. A way to prove his own power. A way to force her compliance. A way to collect the $65,000 he owed to a rival family, money his uncle refused to forgive, money that burned in Marcus's chest like a debt written in fire. Marcus raised his fist again. His knuckles were already stained with her blood. The sound of the Mercedes door opening came like a gunshot in the silence. Now let us go back to the beginning. 6 hours earlier. Before any of this happened. Before Mia Morgan knew that her choice to protect a stranger would change the entire trajectory of her life. Before she understood that she was about to walk straight into a war between empires built on blood and loyalty. Let us rewind to the moment that started everything. Sullivan's Diner smelled like burnt coffee and grease that had absorbed the scent of 10,000 previous meals. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, 2 of them flickering like they were dying, like everything in this part of the city was dying incrementally, slowly, without anyone noticing. The black and white checkered floor was sticky with syrup and the accumulated residue of decades. The lunch rush had ended an hour ago. Now it was just the stragglers, the regulars, the people with nowhere else to be. Mia Morgan stood at the register, counting pennies. Not dollars. Pennies. $2.17. That was all she had left in the world until her shift on Friday. It was only Tuesday. She had a son named Daniel who was 9 years old and currently at his grandmother's house, which meant she had to pick him up at 6 o'clock. She had milk to buy. She had bread to buy. Milk was $4.12 at the grocery store 3 blocks away. The cheapest bread they sold was 99 cents. She had exactly $2 to her name. The math did not work. The math had not worked for 3 years, not since her husband Michael had died in a construction accident, not since the medical bills had come rolling in like an ocean, not since the insurance company had denied the claim and the hospital had filed a lien against her wages, not since her landlord had raised the rent twice because he knew she had nowhere else to go. She counted the pennies again. Her hands were shaking. Sal, the owner of Sullivan's Diner, watched her from behind the kitchen window. 64 years old, liver spots on his hands, kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He had been watching Mia count her money for 6 months now. Every shift. She counted it the same way, methodical, desperate, hopeful that somehow the answer would change. "Take some sandwiches home," Sal said. His voice was gruff but not unkind. "From yesterday. Turkey and Swiss. They're good." Mia looked up. She felt shame rise in her throat like bile, hot and thick. She did not want charity. But she also could not afford pride. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice sounded broken, like it came from somewhere very far away. She wrapped the sandwiches in wax paper with hands that had been burned by coffee, scarred by grease, roughened by work. Her fingernails were short and practical. Her wedding ring was still on her finger, even though Michael had been gone 3 years now. She could not imagine removing it. The afternoon stretched out before her like a sentence with no ending. She had 3 more hours until her shift ended. Then she would walk to the grocery store. Then she would pick up Daniel. Then she would go home to the apartment that was too small and too cold, and she would make pasta for dinner, and she would help Daniel with his homework, and she would lie awake in the dark counting what she owed and what she had and the terrible space between those 2 numbers. But first, she had to finish her shift. She was wiping down the counter when she heard the sound. Not loud. Just a change in the ambient noise of the street outside, a shift in the pattern of traffic and city sounds. Her body recognized danger before her conscious mind did. Her spine straightened. Her hand stilled. Through the diner's front window, she saw movement in the alley across the street. The alley behind the building where she worked. The narrow space between Sullivan's Diner and the abandoned laundromat next to it. The alley that was dark even in daylight, where the sun never seemed to reach. 3 men stood there. 2 of them were large, the kind of large that comes from violence and time spent in gyms, shoulders wide as doorways, hands hanging with a particular looseness that meant they knew how to use them. The 3rd man was younger, maybe late 20s, with gold rings on his fingers that caught the weak afternoon light. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mia made in a month. A child stood between them. A boy. 7 years old. Small for his age, with dark hair and a leather jacket that looked expensive, looking up at the 3 men with eyes that were not afraid yet but were approaching it, moving toward fear the way a person moves toward cold water. Without thinking. Without knowing. Without any understanding of who this child was or why he mattered or what consequence her actions would carry. Mia Morgan walked out of Sullivan's Diner and into the alley. Her apron was still tied around her waist. Her shoes were still wet from the morning when she had stepped in a puddle on her way to work. She was still hungry. She was still desperate. She was still a woman with $2.17 to her name. But something in her saw that child standing between those men, and something in her moved. She stepped into the alley. The February wind hit her face. The 3 men turned to look at her as if she was interrupting something, as if she was an annoyance, a small irrelevant thing that had wandered into their business. "Leave him alone," Mia said. Her voice came out thin and reedy, but it did not break. The young man with the gold ring smiled. It was not a smile that contained anything resembling kindness. "Go back inside, lady," he said. "This is not your business." But Mia stepped forward instead. She positioned herself between the men and the child, spreading her arms, making herself larger, making herself the barrier. "Go," she whispered to the boy. "Run." The men laughed. The sound came like thunder breaking open the alley. It echoed off the brick walls. It contained no humor. Just the sound of power dismissing something insignificant. The young man raised his fist. And the world changed. His knuckles connected with her ribs, and she felt something crack, felt the wind leave her lungs, felt her body betray her, felt herself folding inward like paper being crumpled in a fist. She fell to one knee. Pain exploded through her chest, white and sharp and all-consuming. But she did not move away from the child. She spread her arms wider. Her ribs screamed. Her breath came in gasping, shallow pulls. Blood was dripping from her split lip onto the wet concrete. Her left eye was already starting to swell. "I won't let you take him," she said again, the words barely audible now, just a whisper through split lips and broken ribs, and the kind of courage that comes from having already lost everything that matters. Behind the chain-link fence that bordered the diner's property, on the other side of the street, the black Mercedes with tinted windows sat idling. Inside, Alejandro Caruso watched. His knuckles whitened on the door handle. His breath came slow and deliberate. Something shifted in his chest, something cold and dangerous, something that had been dormant for 20 years stirred and woke. His lieutenant Rocco glanced over. He had not seen his boss look like this in 3 decades. "Go," Alejandro said. His voice came out low, like thunder, like an oath carved in stone. Rocco did not ask questions. Rocco had learned long ago that when Alejandro Caruso gave an order, the only appropriate response was immediate obedience. He turned the key. The Mercedes began to move. The alley was about to become very dangerous. But before any of that could happen, before the men could touch the child again, before Mia Morgan's world could collapse any further, we need to understand how we arrived at this moment. We need to understand the desperation that drove her, the need that made her fearless, the poverty that made her willing to die for a stranger. We need to understand who Alejandro Caruso was, and why a woman's blood on cold concrete would shatter something inside him that had been sealed shut for 2 decades. And we need to understand Marcus Webb, and why he was hunting Mia Morgan with the intensity of a predator, and what he was willing to do to prove that he was powerful, that he mattered, that he was not the disappointment his uncle had always made him feel like. This is the story of how a woman with $2 to her name saved a child she did not know belonged to a mafia boss. This is the story of what happens when the wrong person chooses to be brave. This is the story of what happens next. 6 hours before the alley, before the child, before everything changed, Mia Morgan woke in the darkness of her studio apartment to the sound of Sophie coughing. The radiator hissed and rattled like an animal trapped in the walls, pushing out heat that never quite reached the corners of the room. Outside the cracked window, Chicago's November air pressed against the glass, cold and gray. She did not move for a moment. She just lay there, listening to her daughter cough, feeling the weight of the morning pressing down on her chest like a stone. The apartment was one room. Truly one room. A bed she shared with Sophie. A cot in the corner where Daniel slept under a blanket that had belonged to Michael. A hot plate that served as her kitchen. A sink that ran rust-colored water on Tuesdays. The rent was $930 a month. She made $11 an hour at Sullivan's Diner, 6 days a week, double shifts on Saturdays. The math had stopped working 8 months ago. She rose without waking Sophie. Her feet found the cold floor. The linoleum was peeling at the edges, curled up like the skin of something dead. She moved to the hot plate and lit it with a match, waiting for the electric coil to glow orange. While it heated, she stood at the window and looked down at the street. A man walked past carrying a briefcase. A woman waited for the bus, her coat expensive, her shoes unmarked by the city salt and grime. Somewhere down there was a life that made sense, where rent was not a monthly negotiation with an angry landlord, where milk cartons cost $3 instead of representing half your daily budget. The water boiled. She made coffee with grounds she had used twice already. The bitterness was pronounced, almost medicinal. She drank it anyway. It was hot. That was enough. At 6:30, she woke Daniel first. He was 9 and already carried a stillness that broke her heart. He did not ask for things. He did not ask for much of anything. He simply moved through his days with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that disappointment was the default state of existence. She watched him dress in the school uniform she had washed in the sink the night before, the collar still slightly damp. Sophie was harder to wake. She was 6 and still believed that mornings could be negotiated. Still believed that if she closed her eyes tightly enough, time could be reversed. Mia sat beside her on the cot, Sophie's small hand reaching out instinctively for her mother, finding her in the dark. For a moment, Mia allowed herself to simply hold her daughter. To feel her breathing. To remember what it felt like to be needed in this way. Breakfast was 3 eggs and 2 slices of bread divided 4 ways. The eggs had come from a neighbor, payment for Mia watching her toddler while she worked. The bread was from yesterday's stale loaf that Mrs. Chen had given her. Daniel ate slowly. Sophie dunked her bread in water to soften it, a trick Mia had taught her. Mia had coffee and nothing else. She would eat after she dropped them at school, if there was time, if there was anything left. After they finished, after she had brushed Sophie's hair into 2 braids and tied them with yarn because she could not afford rubber bands, Mia moved to the kitchen table and opened the small ceramic container where she kept her money. It was a container that had held tea once. Michael had brought it home from somewhere, a small gift from before everything became impossible. She tilted it carefully and counted the content onto the table. Quarters. Dimes. Nickels. No bills. She counted 3 times because the number seemed impossible. $2.17. It was Monday. She would not be paid until Friday. That was 4 days. For days for milk, bread, something for lunch, electricity she was already 2 months behind on, the partial rent payment her landlord had agreed to accept before filing eviction. The math had never worked, but today the margin felt especially cruel. She put 6 cents back in the container and slipped $2 into her pocket. The bills had worn soft from handling, nearly transparent in places. She had carried this same amount for 3 weeks, moving it from pocket to pocket, never quite spending it, knowing that once these $2 were gone, there was nothing between her and the choices she did not want to make. The walk to the elementary school took 22 minutes. Mia knew this because she had counted it obsessively when they first moved, calculating whether she could afford the bus money or whether walking was the only sustainable option. Walking was always the only sustainable option. Chicago in November was not kind to people without cars. The wind came off the lake, sharp and purposeful, cutting through her thin jacket like a blade wrapped in ice. Daniel walked on one side of her, Sophie on the other, their small hands holding hers. Other mothers passed them in heated cars. Mia could see them glancing out, registering something about the sight of a woman and 2 children walking in weather that made breathing difficult. She could see pity sometimes. Usually she saw nothing at all. Invisibility was its own kind of shelter. At the school gates, she knelt and kissed them both. Daniel did not hug her goodbye anymore. Somewhere between 7 and 9, he had learned that public displays of affection were dangerous, that needing your mother could be weaponized. But he leaned his forehead against hers for a moment, and that was enough. Sophie wrapped her arms around Mia's neck, fierce and complete, all her love unguarded. "Mommy, will you pick us up?" Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. "I always do, baby. Always. Even if it rains. Even if it rains." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that held a family together. The kind of lie that said the world was predictable, that mothers showed up, that security was not an illusion. Mia watched them walk through the gates, watched them join the stream of children heading toward the building. Daniel turned once and looked back. She waved. He looked away. The walk to Sullivan's diner took another 18 minutes. Her feet hurt before she was halfway there. The shoes she was wearing had belonged to Michael once, before he died, before the cancer took him down to nothing, before she learned what it meant to lose everything in increments. She had inherited his shoes, his death, his absence. The shoes were too large. She wore 2 pairs of socks to make them fit. Sullivan's diner sat on the corner of Ashland and Division. The neon sign in the window flickered inconsistently. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had not updated the sign in 12 years. The flicker had become part of the diner's character, something regulars noted the way one notes a friend's distinguishing feature. Mia pushed through the glass door at 7:14 in the morning. The heater above the door blew warm air down onto her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment and let it touch her face. "You're early," Mrs. Chen called from behind the counter. She was already in her apron, already prepared, having likely been there since 5 to prepare the morning rush. "Yes, I wanted to ask. Double shift again today?" Mrs. Chen looked up from the eggs she was cracking into a steel bowl. She was 61 years old, had owned the diner for 34 years, and had seen thousands of people pass through. She had hired Mia 6 months ago, long enough to understand her situation, long enough to care beyond what the contract required. "You look like hell," Mrs. Chen said. "I feel fine." Mia was already moving toward the back where the aprons hung. The lie came automatically. "You're going to work yourself into the ground, Mia. A person can only give so much before there is nothing left." Mia tied the apron around her waist. It was stained with the evidence of yesterday's breakfast shift. Coffee. Ketchup. Something that might have been maple syrup. She had started the job with 6 aprons and washed them each night in the sink. Now she rotated through 4. "I need the hours, Mrs. Chen." "I know you do." Mrs. Chen's voice carried something that sounded almost like grief. "Go. Table 3 needs coffee. Table 7 needs to order." The morning rush came and went. Businessmen in suits that cost more than Mia's monthly rent. Women in expensive casual wear that Mia recognized as the uniform of people who did not have to count pennies. A construction crew that left the diner smelling like diesel and sweat. The coffee pot was heavy. Her arms burned by 9 o'clock. Her feet screamed by 10. At 10:45, Mrs. Chen told her to take her lunch break. There was no break room. No staff meal. Mia took her break on the back steps, smoking a cigarette that she had found half-smoked in an ashtray 3 days ago and finished saving for this moment. The smoke filled her lungs and made her dizzy. She had not eaten since the morning, the 3 eggs she had split with her children. She should have saved some. She should have eaten something. But there had not been enough, and Sophie was still so small, and Daniel was still growing, and the mathematics of motherhood required constant sacrifice. She looked at the $2 in her pocket. She looked at the grocery store across the street. The decision had already been made before she touched the money. She knew what she had to buy. Milk. Bread. Nothing else could matter. She could not eat. She could not buy herself a newspaper or a bottle of water. She could not imagine luxuries. The money was not hers. The money belonged to her children. At 1:45, her double shift began in earnest. She was scheduled to work until 9. At 2 o'clock, during the afternoon lull, Mrs. Chen told her to take her second break. This time, Mia did not go to the back steps. This time, she walked across the street to the corner grocery, the $2 gripped in her palm like a prayer. The grocery store smelled like vegetable crates and concrete floors. The lights were bright and made her squint. She moved directly to the refrigerated section. The milk cost $1.63. The bread was 45 cents. Together they were $2.08. She had counted wrong. She always counted wrong. The cashier was a young man, maybe 22, with a name tag that read Devon. He watched as Mia put the items on the counter. He rang them up. She handed over her $2. He was quiet. He looked at the total, then at her, then at the milk and bread. "It's $2.08, he said quietly. "You're 8 cents short." She had been 8 cents short for as long as she could remember. She reached into her pocket to find the 8 cents she had counted out this morning. Her fingers touched the ceramic container of 1,000 small moments of deprivation. "I have them," she said. She counted out the 8 cents. Copper-colored. the weight of her poverty made physical. She walked back to the diner with the milk and bread in a paper bag, feeling the cold air bite at her face, feeling her feet ache against the pavement, feeling something that was not quite desperation, not quite resignation, but something between them. The alley behind the diner was her shortcut home. It saved 3 minutes. In a life where time was a resource as precious as money, 3 minutes mattered. She was halfway through when she heard it. A child crying. An adult voice, sharp and threatening. She stopped. The sound was coming from around the dumpster, behind the brick wall that separated the alley from the loading dock. She could have walked past. She could have kept her head down and her eyes forward and pretended that the sounds belonged to someone else, something that was not her responsibility, someone else's tragedy. She could have remembered that she had barely enough for her own children, that she had no money, no power, no ability to help anyone. Instead, she set down the paper bag and walked toward the voices. The alley was narrow and dark, the kind of place where sound died and desperation echoed. Mia rounded the corner behind the dumpster and froze. 3 men in suits that cost more than everything she owned stood in a semicircle around a small child, a boy no older than 5, with dark curling hair and eyes wide with terror. His name was Emma. She did not know this yet. "Please," the child whispered, backing toward the brick wall. "I want to go home." The man closest to him was young, maybe 30, with slick back hair and a gold watch that caught the weak winter light. His smile was the kind that made your stomach drop. He crouched down to Emma's level, his knuckles brushing the child's chin in a gesture that was supposed to look gentle but felt like a threat wrapped in silk. "Where's your daddy, little man?" His voice was smooth, practiced, poisoned. Mia did not think. She never thought. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, before the arithmetic of her poverty could whisper that this was not her fight, that she had nothing to give, that a woman with $2 in her pocket and cracked ribs from a previous beating had no business inserting herself between danger and its prey. She stepped between them. "He's with me," she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. "Let him go." The man straightened. His smile widened. Well, well. A hero. He was taller than her by 8 inches, broader through the shoulders, dressed in a suit that probably cost what she made in 2 months. Behind him, his 2 companions shifted, soldiers waiting for orders. One of them spoke into his wrist. The other checked his watch like this was a scheduled event, something timed and inevitable. "You know who I am, sweetheart." The man stepped toward her, slow, casual, the way a predator moves when it knows its prey has nowhere to run. Mia shook her head, positioning herself lower, creating a human shield. Her hand found the child's shoulder and pulled him behind her legs. "Don't care. He's a child." The smile vanished. What replaced it was worse, a hardness that turned his face into something carved from marble, something that had forgotten how to be anything but cruel. The first blow came fast. An open palm across her face that snapped her head sideways and filled her mouth with copper. She tasted blood, warm and immediate, coating her tongue like a second language. Her ears rang. The world tilted. She did not move. The second hit was a fist to her ribs. She heard the crack before she felt it, a sound like a tree branch breaking in a storm, and then the air left her lungs in a rush. Pain bloomed across her entire right side, sharp and hungry and absolute. She gasped, choked, trying to breathe through the agony. Behind her, Emma screamed. The man grabbed her by the throat, his fingers wrapping around her neck like a vice, and lifted. Her toes scraped the frozen pavement. Stars bloomed in her vision. Black spots multiplied at the edges of everything. She was drowning in air, suffocating while standing upright. "You stupid, do you have any idea what you just walked into?" His breath was hot against her face. "You just volunteered to become leverage. Congratulations, sweetheart." His fingers tightened. 1 more second, maybe 2, and she would lose consciousness. 1 more second after that and something inside her would break permanently. But she reached back with one hand, her arm trembling, and found Emma's small fingers. She squeezed them, the only message she could send without words: "Stay behind me, I have got you, do not let go." Across the street, visible through the tinted windows of a black Mercedes, Alejandro Caruso watched. He was not supposed to be there. He had come to the diner to collect his son from his usual afternoon meeting with the nanny, but Emma had texted him a strange message, which he immediately recognized as a sign that something was wrong. So he had arrived early, parked across the street, told his driver Rocco to wait. Now he sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, watching his nephew Marcus Webb beat a stranger into submission in the frozen December air. Rocco's hand moved toward the door handle. "Boss, we need to." Alejandro raised one hand. A single gesture. It stopped Rocco as effectively as a gunshot would have. His lieutenant withdrew, but his jaw clenched. "How long has Marcus been following my son?" Alejandro's voice was soft, which made it worse. Soft voices in his world were the ones that preceded violence. Rocco hesitated. 3 weeks, boss. Ever since we moved Emma to the private school on Michigan Avenue. Marcus found out about the location. Alejandro watched his nephew's fist connect with Mia's face again. Blood spattered across her cheek. She spat crimson onto the frozen ground. And she still did not move. The pieces clicked together like bullets sliding into a magazine. Marcus was not simply being cruel, cruelty was his nature, his inheritance, his way of decorating his days. This was calculated. Marcus had been hunting this woman for months. Rocco had mentioned it weeks ago. She had rejected him at the diner, refused his advances, humiliated him in front of his men. But more than that, Marcus was using Emma as leverage. The $65,000 the Castellano family was demanding, the debt Alejandro still owed them from a miscalculation 3 months back, this was Marcus's opportunity to prove he could collect it himself. To prove he could take over territory. To humiliate his uncle publicly and strip his power in one calculated move. Alejandro's door opened. The winter air flooded in, and with it came the smell of ice, an approaching storm, and something darker underneath. The smell of a man's patience finally reaching its absolute limit. He stepped onto the street. The temperature in the alley dropped 20 degrees. Marcus did not hear the footsteps at first. Alejandro moved without sound, without the casual heaviness of ordinary men. He was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, moving through space the way a predator moves through tall grass, each motion economical, purposeful, absolutely inevitable. The first sign Marcus had that something had changed was the shadow falling across the alley entrance. The shadow of his uncle. He dropped Mia. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, her lungs burning, one eye already swelling shut. She saw stars, then nothing, then stars again. Her ribs screamed. She could not breathe without feeling like her chest was being torn open from the inside. Emma ran. The boy ran toward the entrance of the alley, toward the shadow, toward the tall man in the long cashmere coat that cost more than Mia made in a year. Emma ran toward Alejandro Caruso like he was home itself, like he was safety given human form. Alejandro caught him with one arm, lifting him effortlessly, settling the boy against his chest. Emma wrapped his arms around his father's neck and buried his face in the space between Alejandro's shoulder and his jaw, the place where a child goes when the world becomes too large and too terrible. Only then did Alejandro's eyes move to Marcus. His gaze was flat. Empty. Like looking into a tomb. "Explain," he said. One word. That was all it took. Marcus went white. The color drained from his face like water from a broken vessel. Behind him, his two enforcers exchanged glances and began backing away slowly, melting into the shadows like they had never existed at all. "Uncle, she was interfering with, I was handling a personal matter. You put your hands on someone protecting my son." Alejandro's voice was still soft. That was the worst part. His voice was soft and his eyes were dead, and somewhere in the darkness of the alley, time seemed to stop. "You used her as leverage against me." The silence stretched like taffy, growing longer and more unbearable. A car horn sounded 3 blocks away. A siren wailed in the distance. Snow began to fall, large gentle flakes that looked almost beautiful descending into this ugliness. "She's nobody," Marcus whispered, desperate now, scrambling for something that might save him. "Just some waitress who's been playing hard to get." "She's—" "Get out of my sight." Marcus ran. He did not walk or back away or maintain any dignity. He ran like something was chasing him, his expensive shoes slipping on the ice, his arms flailing, his breath coming in panic gasps. His men followed. Within seconds, the alley was empty except for 3 people, a man holding a child, a woman bleeding on the ground, and the winter pressing down on all of them like a curse. Alejandro lowered himself beside Mia, still cradling Emma, and extended one hand toward her. His hand was large, scarred, capable of terrible things. But his voice, when he spoke, was gentle. "Can you stand?" She tried. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her ribs felt like they were on fire. Her left eye was swollen, nearly shut now. She rose to her knees and immediately fell back down. Alejandro set Emma down for just a moment, instructing his son to wait right there, do not move, and then he lifted Mia effortlessly with both arms. She weighed nothing to him. A feather. A prayer. Something weightless and precious that needed to be carried. He carried her to the Mercedes. The hospital was not a hospital in the traditional sense, not the kind with public waiting rooms and ancient magazines and fluorescent lights that made everything look diseased. This was a private hospital, the kind where money ensured discretion, where questions were never asked, where the best physicians in Chicago kept their most dangerous clients healthy and quiet. Mia woke in a room with pale blue walls and windows that faced north toward the lake. Machines beeped softly around her, and 4 dripped clear fluid into her arm. Her ribs were wrapped tightly, too cracked, the doctor would tell her, along with severe contusions, a minor concussion, and what they euphemistically referred to as blunt force trauma. In the corner of the room, Emma slept on a small sofa, wrapped in Alejandro's suit jacket like it was the most precious blanket in the world. Alejandro sat in the chair beside her bed. He had not moved in 3 hours. Rocco stood outside the door, positioned like a sentinel. Sal was 2 floors down, making phone calls in Italian, his voice a low rumble of consequence. When Mia's eyes opened, Alejandro spoke first. "You have 2 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, and a concussion." His voice was informative, factual, stripped of emotion. "The doctor says you'll heal. It will take time. It will hurt." She tried to sit up. Fire erupted across her right side. "Don't move," he said, and she froze. "I can't pay for this," she whispered. The words came automatically, the reflex of someone who had spent years calculating what she could and could not afford, what she owed and what she did not. "You threw yourself in front of 3 armed men for a child you didn't know. He needed help." Alejandro was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something underneath, something broken and being held together by will alone. "That child is my son. Emma." The name hung between them like a secret finally being released into the world. "I have not told many people. His existence is complicated. His mother died bringing him into the world. She was not married to me. In my world, that means Emma's life is always in danger, leverage, a weakness, a target." She understood now. The 3 men. The careful hunt. Marcus using the child as a weapon against his own uncle. "Then why would you help me?" she asked, and her voice was so small it barely moved the air. "I'm nobody. I have $2 in my pocket and a mortgage I can't pay and 2 kids waiting for me at home. I am nobody, and I have nothing." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had seen everything beautiful in the world die. 20 years ago I had a son," Alejandro said quietly. "His name was Antonio. He was stillborn. 3 pounds, 7 ounces. I held him for 6 minutes and then they took him away." His voice did not crack, but it sounded like it wanted to. "My wife left me 2 years later. She said I was a monument to death, and she could not bear living in a tomb. The nursery in my house still has his crib. His name is still painted on the wall. I have never removed it." He stopped. Collected himself. The machine beside Mia's bed beeped steadily, measuring her heart, recording evidence that she was still alive. "Emma is my second chance," Alejandro continued. "And you protected him when I could not. You threw yourself between him and danger without knowing who he was, without knowing what it might cost you. That is not nothing. That is the most valuable thing I have ever witnessed." The next 3 days happened inside a mountain lodge 2 hours north of Chicago. A blizzard moved in from the north, covering the world in white, trapping them together in a place that existed outside of time and consequence. The lodge was enormous, made of dark wood and stone, with tall windows that overlooked a forest of pines. A fireplace dominated the main room. Outside, snow piled against the windows like the world was trying to erase them. She learned that he was a widower, that Emma's mother had hemorrhaged during labor, that no amount of money or power or connection had been able to save her. She learned that he had built this lodge as an escape from the violence of his empire, a place where he could pretend to be ordinary, a place where his son could simply be a child. They sat by the fireplace on the third night. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket so soft it felt like being held by clouds. He held a glass of whiskey he did not drink, turning it slowly, watching the ice melt. "Tell me about your husband," he said. So she did. She told him about Michael, how they had met at a community college, how he had worked construction, how he had been building a shopping center on the north side when the scaffolding failed. How he had fallen from 40 feet. How he had been conscious for 3 minutes after hitting the ground, which the paramedic said was mercy, but she thought was cruelty. How he had left her with 2 children and a mortgage and medical bills that had metastasized into a debt so large it had become almost abstract, a number too big to be real. "The Castellano family is demanding $65,000, she said quietly. Marcus mentioned it. That's what this was about, wasn't it? He was using Emma to force you to pay. To prove he could collect. Alejandro did not deny it. In the firelight, his face looked carved from stone, beautiful and terrible and infinitely sad. Yes. Can you pay it? Yes. Will you? He was quiet for a very long time. That depends on what happens next. His men watched from a distance. Rocco and Sal exchanged glances in the kitchen, standing among the stainless steel and marble, speaking in low Italian voices. In 15 years I have never seen him like this, Rocco said. Sal nodded. It's the anniversary next week. 20 years since Antonio. His grief always finds him at this time. But what neither of them knew was that Marcus Webb was not finished. He had been obsessed with Mia for months, stalking her shifts at the diner, collecting details about her life, her children, her vulnerabilities. And now, humiliated and desperate, he was preparing his final move, not against his uncle, but against the woman who had made him weak in front of his uncle. And somewhere in a penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, Cordelia Blackwood, Marcus's mother, a woman whose cruelty operated through whispered words and carefully orchestrated social destruction, was already making phone calls. Already planting stories. Already dismantling her own son's future to protect the family name. On the third night, as the blizzard finally broke apart into crystal-clear darkness studded with stars like diamonds, Mia sat at the lodge's desk with trembling hands and began to write a letter. The ink felt heavy against the paper. Her hands would not stop shaking. Because she had just realized something that changed everything, she had to leave. She had to disappear. Because if she stayed, Emma would remain a target. And if she stayed, Alejandro would move heaven and earth to protect her, and in protecting her, he would destroy himself. The sound of footsteps on hardwood interrupted her. Alejandro appeared in the doorway, and his expression changed the moment he saw what she was writing. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp now, alarmed. She set down the pen. Outside, a wind began to pick up through the pines, moving through the trees like something alive and searching. "The only thing I can do," she whispered. The letter trembled in Mia's hands as the pen touched paper. Outside the lodge windows, the blizzard had finally surrendered to a crystal darkness studded with stars like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers that glowed the color of dying blood. She wrote, "Alejandro, I can't stay. Every moment I'm near you puts Emma in danger. Marcus won't stop, and I won't be the reason your son loses his father. You showed me kindness I didn't deserve. You saw me when I was invisible. That's more than I ever." Her hand stopped. The pen fell to the desk. Tears blurred the remaining words until they became nothing but salt-stained illegible marks on paper that suddenly felt like a goodbye note, like a death sentence, like a blade cutting through the only warmth she had ever known. She folded the letter twice. Her fingers moved like they belonged to someone else, someone still drowning, someone still counting the seconds until the water closed over her head. She placed it on the fireplace mantel beside the photograph of Michael, her husband, 3 years dead, still smiling at a camera in a world that no longer existed. His face watched her as she turned away. The small bag of belongings Rocco had brought from her apartment sat by the door. Everything she owned fit inside. A change of clothes. A pair of shoes with a hole in the sole. Emma's birth certificate. $43 in cash. Not enough. Never enough. She moved toward the exit like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible, the same way she had moved through the last 3 years. One hand reached for her coat. Then the footsteps came. Alejandro filled the doorway like a storm cloud filling the sky. His eyes were the color of slate during an approaching winter, and in them burned something that made her breath catch. He held the letter in his hand. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp now, alarmed, the way a man sounds when something precious is being taken from him. She could not speak. The words had all burned away. "Mia." He stepped forward. "Look at me." She looked. That was her mistake and her salvation both. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered the way a judge delivers a verdict. Final. Irrevocable. "I was going to leave so you'd survive," she whispered. "I have survived 20 years of nothing." His voice dropped lower, and it sounded like thunder rolling across distant mountains. "I am not letting you walk away now." She opened her mouth to respond, to explain the mathematics of danger, how staying meant Emma would eventually become a target, how his love for her would be used as leverage until both of them shattered like glass, but the night interrupted them. Headlights cut through the darkness outside, harsh and white and terrible. They swept across the lodge's front wall like the eyes of something predatory searching for prey. Car doors slammed. 4 of them, maybe 5. The sound of boots on frozen gravel. Then a voice, slurred and vicious, cut through the cold air. "Uncle. Come out and face me like a man. Or are you too busy playing house with that waitress whore?" "Marcus." Alejandro's expression changed in one instant. The softness vanished. His jaw tightened until it looked carved from stone. His eyes went empty of everything except the cold mathematics of calculation and control. She had seen men change before, but never like this, watched a human being become a weapon, watched love transform into something dangerous and absolute. "Rocco," he called out. His voice never raised. It did not need to. "Get Emma and Mia to the basement. Now." But Mia stepped forward. "No. I'm the one he wants." "Mia." "I'm the one he wants," she repeated. Her voice surprised her. It was steady. It did not shake. "I started this. I finish it." She walked to the door before he could stop her. Pulled on her coat. Stepped out into the November night where the cold hit her like a physical force, like a punch to the chest, like a blade wrapped in ice that cut through every layer she wore. Marcus Webb stood in the driveway with 4 men. All armed. All eager in the way predators are eager before the kill. Marcus himself was drunk, she could see it in the way he swayed, the way his gun hand dipped and rose like something not quite under his control. His face was a map of rage and humiliation. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had never heard the word no before and did not know how to accept it now. "There she is," he slurred. "You think you're special? You think he actually cares about you?" He raised his gun. The barrel pointed at her chest. "You're nobody. You were always nobody. A waitress. A used-up widow. And when you're dead, my uncle will finally remember that blood matters more than—" Mia did not move. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From exhaustion. From 3 years of drowning. From the weight of every moment since Michael died, every shift worked for $2 and change, every night she had counted the days until she could afford to feed her daughter properly. From the beating 3 days ago that had left her ribs screaming with every breath. For a moment, standing in the killing cold in the clothes of a woman with $43 to her name, she thought, maybe it would be easier to just let go. Maybe the water deserves to close over me. Maybe I'm supposed to drown. Then she saw Emma's face in the window behind her. Small. Terrified. Waiting for her mother to disappear like everyone else had disappeared. And she remembered Michael's voice, the way he used to say it when the bills came and the hospital sent another notice and everything was falling apart. "You're stronger than you know, Mia. You're stronger than you know." She met Marcus's eyes. "Then pull the trigger," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the frozen ground like a blade. "But you'll have to explain to your family why you murdered an unarmed woman in front of witnesses." Marcus's hand froze. In that single second of hesitation, that fraction of a moment where rage collided with the knowledge that the FBI could trace a bullet, that his mother would disappear him if he created a scandal this public, in that moment, everything changed. 12 men materialized from the tree line like ghosts. Like shadow given form. Like death arriving on schedule. They wore black tactical gear and moved with the precision of soldiers. Ex-military. Perfectly coordinated. Each one worth more to Alindro than Marcus's entire criminal enterprise. Alindro's voice cut through the night, deep and solid like an oath. "You made a mistake, Marcus. You assumed I was alone." The tactical team advanced. Marcus's men dropped their weapons without resistance. They understood immediately what had always been true: they were outgunned. Outpositioned. Already dead if they tried otherwise. Marcus turned to run. Rocco appeared before him like conjured shadow, blocking his path. Marcus stumbled. Fell to his knees in the snow with his hands up and his face crumbling into the expression of a child who finally understands that the world does not forgive. "Uncle, please," he begged. His voice broke like ice under weight. "I was just trying to help. The Costianos were going to kill you if you didn't pay the $65,000. I was trying to save us. I was trying to. By threatening my son." Alindro's voice was colder than the night itself. "By beating an innocent woman. I just wanted you to see me," Marcus whispered. "I just wanted you to respect me. You wanted power you did not earn." Alindro turned to Sal. "Call Detective Morrison. Marcus has information about the Castellano operation. Drug routes. Money laundering. Everything. He will trade it for a reduced sentence." Marcus's eyes widened. His mouth opened. No words came out. "Federal prison," Alindro continued. 40 years if you cooperate. Life if you refuse. Too quick, too easy, too merciful to simply kill you. You will have plenty of time to think about respect." As Marcus was dragged away, screaming, begging, his voice shredding raw against the cold, a black town car pulled up the drive. It moved slowly. Deliberately. The headlights cut off with surgical precision. Cordelia Blackwood stepped out. She wore a coat that probably cost more than Mia had earned in the last 2 years. Charcoal grey cashmere with a white fur collar. Her hair was styled in the way that required weekly appointments at salons Mia would never enter. Her face was composed in an expression of absolute indifference as her own son was hauled past her toward a waiting vehicle. She did not look at him. Did not acknowledge his existence. She walked to Alindro instead. "I assume you have everything you need," she said. Her voice was the texture of silk wrapped around razors. He nodded once. "The evidence of his crimes has been delivered to Channel 7 News," she continued. "It will air in 20 minutes. Video documentation of him threatening witnesses. Transfers from family accounts totaling $412,000. His connections to 3 unsolved murders in the city. His former allies are already making statements. They will claim ignorance, of course, but the optics are devastating." She smiled. It was thin and terrible, a smile like a blade. "By morning, the Blackwood name will be clear. And Marcus will face justice alone. As nature intended." She turned to walk back to her car. Mia spoke without thinking. "You're destroying your own son." Cordelia paused. She looked back at Mia with eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, no humanity. Just calculation. Just the cold logic of business. "I am protecting the family from a cancer," she said. Marcus was always weak. Always entitled. Always lacking the discipline required for this world. Better he falls now than drag us all down later. She returned to her town car. The engine started with a whisper. The tires crunched on frozen gravel. Within 30 seconds, she had disappeared into the darkness, back toward the city, back toward whatever penthouse apartment held her next appointment. Mia turned to Alindro. The cold had worked its way through her coat now. Her entire body was shaking. "That's the world you live in?" she asked. He stepped forward. He took her coat and wrapped her in his own instead. The fabric was warm. It still held his heat. It smelled like sandalwood and something expensive she would never be able to afford. "It is the world I am trying to protect Emma from," he said. Inside the lodge, they stood in the darkness and watched the news broadcast unfold on the television. Marcus's mugshot filled the screen. His crimes detailed in excruciating specificity. Former allies giving statements. Business associates running for distance. His reputation torn apart fiber by fiber until nothing remained but the skeleton of a man already destroyed. The Castellano debt was resolved within the hour when Alindro provided federal authorities with evidence of their entire operation in exchange for immunity, a transaction that left everyone alive and the scales balanced in the way that the underworld understood balance. Justice measured in survival, not revenge. Emma slept between them on the sofa, her small body finally at peace. Mia's hand found Alindro's in the darkness. Outside, the pines bent under the weight of new snow beginning to fall. Another storm arriving. Another night of cold that would try to break them. But they would not break. Not this time. Not anymore. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The kitchen falls silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of children laughing in the living room. 1 week has passed since the lodge, since the blizzard, since everything changed. Mia sits at the table in Alindro's Chicago townhouse with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, steam rising between her face and his. The apartment is not what she imagined. It is warm. Lived in. Emma's toys scattered across the hardwood floor like a map of a normal childhood. Alindro sets a folder in front of her. Inside, photographs of an apartment. 3 bedrooms. Hardwood floors catching winter light. A kitchen with counter space for more than a hot plate and a microwave. "Rocco found you this place," he says. His voice is steady, careful, like a man negotiating a peace treaty. Safe neighborhood. 2 blocks from a good school. First year's rent is covered. She looks up sharply. "I can't accept that. Your children need stability. Daniel and Sophie deserve better than a studio with an eviction notice taped to the door." He sits across from her, and the morning light catches the silver at his temples. His hands rest flat on the table, and she notices for the first time that his knuckles are scarred, mapped with violence from decades of building an empire that cost him everything that mattered. I need someone I can trust around Emma. Someone who would take a beating to protect him. Someone like you. She thinks of Marcus's fists connecting with her ribs, of the way she had stood between him and Emma without hesitation, without calculation. She had simply moved. Love does not pause to ask whether it is wise. What would I be, she asks. A nanny? A bodyguard? Family? The word hangs between them like a held breath. Mia's fingers move to her pocket, where Michael's photograph lives, worn soft from being touched 10,000 times. Her husband's face, frozen at 32 years old, forever smiling at a camera in a garden that no longer exists. For 3 years she has carried him with her, and she has not allowed anyone else close enough to understand the weight of that grief. But Emma is 5 years old and asks for her every morning. And Alejandro's eyes hold the same kind of broken that she recognizes from her own mirror. I have conditions, she says. My children come first. Always. No illegal activity around them. And if Emma is ever in danger because of your world, I walk. He extends his hand across the table. When they shake, his grip is warm and certain. Agreed. From the doorway, Rocco and Sal watch the exchange. Sal leans close, whispers something that makes Rocco's face break into a grin. When's the last time you saw that? Sal asks. Rocco's answer is barely audible. 20 years. Not since before Antonio. That afternoon, Alejandro leads her down the hallway to a room he has never opened while Emma was awake. The door is painted blue. The hinges creak slightly as it swings inward. Inside, a crib sits untouched. A dresser with drawers that hold clothes no child will ever wear. On the wall, letters painted in careful script, Antonio. The room smells like furniture polish and the particular sadness of things preserved but not used. Mia stands beside him in the doorway. She does not speak. The silence is not empty. It is full of his grief, 20 years of it, still fresh enough to bleed. I used to come in here every night, Alejandro says finally. Talk to him like he could hear me. Tell him about my day, about the business, about how much I missed him. He knew you loved him. How can you be sure? She thinks of Michael, of the way love did not stop when his heart did. Because love doesn't need words. It's in the staying. You stayed for him, even after he was gone. You built this shrine and you visit it and you keep his name alive. That's love. That's the opposite of forgetting. He turns to her, and his eyes are wet. Emma asks why there's a room he's not allowed in. I don't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth, she says. That he had a brother who couldn't stay, but who loved him anyway. That family is complicated and messy and sometimes it hurts, but we keep showing up. That night, Alejandro sits on the edge of Emma's bed and tells him about Antonio for the first time. Emma listens with his small fists curled in the blanket, his dark eyes wide and serious the way children's eyes are when they understand that something matters. Can I see the room? Emma asks. They stand together at the nursery door, and the air feels different now, less like a tomb and more like a space holding a memory. Emma presses his face against the doorframe and studies the crib with the solemn attention of a scientist examining evidence. Can I paint something for him? Emma asks. Alejandro nods, unable to speak. Emma brings a brush and red paint, the color of pomegranates and fresh blood and Christmas, and he presses his small hand against the wall beside Antonio's name. When he lifts his hand away, his handprint remains, bright red, 5 fingers splayed toward a brother he will never meet. So he knows he has a brother too, Emma says. A simple fact delivered with the weight of theology. Mia watches from the hallway, and when Alejandro catches her eye, he mouths, "Thank you." The tears on his face catch the light, and she understands that she has witnessed something sacred, something that had been locked away for 2 decades and is finally being allowed to breathe. 6 months later, the townhouse is unrecognizable. Summer sunshine pours through open windows. The living room has become a war zone of water guns and squealing children. Emma, Daniel, and Sophie race through the space like wild animals, their voices colliding in that beautiful chaos that only children can create. Rocco sits on the sofa pretending to be shot, falling dramatically to the carpet while Sophie shrieks with laughter and climbs on his chest. Mia stands at the kitchen counter making sandwiches, her apartment now just storage for extra furniture because she has not slept there in 4 months. The studio with the eviction notice feels like a previous life, something that happened to someone else. Alindro appears beside her and steals a slice of turkey from the cutting board. Rocco's going soft, he says. Let Sophie tag him for times. She's 7 and adorable. He never stood a chance. They work in comfortable silence, the kind that builds from shared mornings and late-night conversations and the slow construction of something neither of them planned. The kitchen fills with the smell of bread and mustard and the ordinary piece of domestic life. Outside, the city moves on in its relentless way, violence and crime continuing in corners they have chosen to leave behind. I have a board meeting next week, he says quietly. About legitimizing the family operations. Going completely legal. Cutting ties with the Costillanos. She sets down the knife. That will make enemies. Powerful ones. Then they're idiots. It takes more strength to walk away from power than to abuse it. He studies her face. The scars from Marcus's beating have faded to thin lines, barely visible unless the light catches them just right. But the strength in her eyes has only grown, like a tree that has been burned and grows back thicker. You changed everything, he says. You know that? You protected my son. You took a beating from my own nephew to keep Emma safe. You showed me what courage actually looks like. She touches his face. His skin is warm. There is no violence in him right now, only a man trying to be better than his reputation. And you showed me that starting over doesn't mean forgetting what came before. Michael will always be part of me. Antonio will always be part of you. But we get to choose what comes next. He kisses her then, gentle and certain, while 3 children scream with laughter in the next room and Rocco yells in mock defeat. The townhouse windows stand open to the summer air, and the music playing inside drifts out onto the street, the kind of ordinary chaos that used to terrify Alindro because it reminded him of everything he had lost. Now it is everything he has found. Mia entered that alley with $2 in her pocket and no idea her life was about to transform. She protected a stranger's child and discovered a family she never expected. Marcus Webb sits in a federal prison, facing 40 years, abandoned by the allies who once feared him. And Alindro Caruso learned that the strongest armor is not violence or power, but the courage to let someone in. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption. Comment below, would you protect a stranger's child if it meant risking everything? We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.